Good evening. Welcome back to My Every Fences and welcome back to the European Fertility Society. We are back with one more topic for you today, and we have Alan Thornhill, Dr. Alan Thornhill, with us once again. Thank you so much, Alan, for joining us. This is your second webinar this year with us, but of course, you had a few webinars with us before, and this topic is definitely something that I'm sure lots of you, many of you, if not all, are wondering about. So we are ready to discuss it. Choose the right clinic for you. And I would like to emphasize that it's not about the best clinic, but the right clinic. I know that Alan always is focusing on this part, and I totally agree. And I think it's something that we should all be aware of. Not every best clinic might be actually right for you. So I think that this is a great topic to discuss today. Thank you, Alan, so much again for joining us, and we are ready to hear what you have to say about it. And of course, you have your expertise, you have your experience, and I'm sure you are ready to share some insights with us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much, Caroline. Hello, everyone. It's really exciting to be here again and talk to you. And I mean, anyone who knows me from either the field or maybe the coaching world now knows that I don't like to give the same talk twice. So although you may see on the website there's a similar talk with a very similar title, it's different. I always update it. I can't bear to do the same talk twice. So I keep the stuff that's still relevant and I try and put new stuff in. And you will find stuff today that is from today and from the news today. So it's really up to date because I think that's, the most important thing for you guys is to have up-to-date information. So let's crack on then. You won't see my little face for a little while. I'm going to go to screen.
We will see you. We will still see you, of course. But before we
me.
start, yes, definitely. So even though you will not see, let's say, us, right? We will see you. But basically, before we start, let me just remind everyone that we are going to start with the presentation. Afterwards, there will be time for your questions because I'm sure you are here for all the questions. So don't forget to just type those in the chat section, and Alan will definitely be able to answer them for you. And I know it's always your favorite part, so don't hesitate. Any questions you have, any comments, anything that you would like to share, it's an open space, it's anonymous. So don't hesitate as always. And of course, we can start with the presentation on our topic. And you can start sharing your screen and we can go ahead with it.
Thank you. Right. Everything. You can see everything?
Not yet.
Oh, it's coming then. Is that good?
Nothing yet. You can see it. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I didn't press the magic button, did I?
Not yet, at least.
I think you might be sharing. That's why.
Okay, now it should be okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. Okay, so as Caroline said, it's about choosing the right clinic for your treatment. Okay, and we're going to cover right versus best in a second. And I've, given this a different subtitle today. I've called it one of the most important decisions you'll ever make. Now, you can argue with me about that, maybe in the chat later. But from the people I meet, it seems to be one of the most important decisions that they have either not managed to make the way they would have liked, or they have made it the way they liked. But it's certainly an important decision. No question about that. So I often talk like this, that, in a perfect world, I wouldn't need to be doing this. And every clinic that you would talk to would basically be, I don't want to say identical, but would give you the same level of service, the same types of treatments, the same experience of staff, the same prices, success rates would be the same. The legal and regulatory things that are in place would be the same. So you wouldn't find that there's something you can't do in a particular country. But I think everybody knows that's really not the case. And if they don't know that, then I'm afraid, that's the bad news for tonight. We're not in a perfect world. So you have to learn a lot and be your own advocate and navigate this tricky world very quickly. And given that before you even start treatment, a clinic is one of the big decisions you're going to make. This is the first, one of the first barriers you've got to jump over, unfortunately. So here's the thing about right versus best. That's an orchid on the right. We'll come to that in a second. So best is usually considered the one with the highest success rate. So, I mean, it could mean a lot of things, but I think that's what people generally mean by best. I'd say in order of importance, next comes cost and location, third. Now, you may be sitting there thinking, well, those aren't the most important things to me. That's absolutely fine. This is just from surveys that the UK regulator did a few years ago. No surprises, really. Success rates, cost, and location are the top three. But I think one of my messages today is we're going to look into those in a little more detail to understand them better, but also to consider that there's a lot more. And you're all individuals and you all have specific needs and unique needs. There's a lot in common, but there's a lot different as well. And it's those other things that we want to try and get a handle on. Not that the top three are, there's not nuances there and tricky things to navigate there. There are, but there's always more. So if it were just those top three things, life would be a bit simpler, but there's more to it than that. And we'll go through some of those things. So one of the reasons why best as success rate isn't always the best metric to use, if you like, is because there might be age limits at particular clinics that are so-called best, that have this high success rate for, let's say, women under 35. They may not have the best success rates for women who you feel fit into that age group. So maybe you're in a different age group, and they may not have the best rates for that. So rarely would you find a clinic that has everything, it tops the charts, so to speak. And even if it does, there'll be other things that maybe make it not the right place for you. You've got to consider with success rates the treatment type. They may have the best success with using your own eggs, but they may not have the best success with donor eggs, or they may have very little experience of that. And experience counts in this business. And I hope I say that again later. Consistency and experience are really important. Do they have a waiting list? It's all very well trying to go to the best place, but if you want to get treated now, then somewhere that says, well, you're going to have to wait for 3 months, 6 months, that's your time that's being wasted. They're just queuing you up. So you've got to think about that particular factor very seriously. And then flexibility, and this can mean lots of different things. One thing it can mean is, do they work around you, or do you have to work around them? I heard an old story that I've heard many times before about a particular clinic where you have to go in at a certain time, you have to sit around and wait. And while that might be a good clinic and good success rates, not everybody has the ability or the desire to do that. Do they consider patient well-being, or is it really just a case of it's transactional, we just want to get a result? So these are all things, those are a bit general, but you will have very specific things in your mind. And that's what I want you to be spending a lot of time thinking about, and not just focusing on those top three things. And then you just will have this list of very specific needs, and we'll go through some of those in a second. And the reason I say this is I don't want you to think of yourself as a cactus or an orchid particularly, but just to use that kind of silly analogy, we're all different. And some of you might be more like a cactus, some of you might be more like an orchid. They don't grow in the same conditions. They don't thrive in the same conditions. Cactus, generally the desert, orchid, generally the jungle. So that's just my point about we're all different and we have different needs. So a little bit about me, if you haven't been to one of my webinars before, I'm a registered clinical scientist with embryology specialty. So I've been in the IVF lab, and I've been doing that for a long time, but actually I've done loads of other jobs around that. More than 25 years of experience, lots of publications. Why I think that's relevant to this kind of audience is because it means I'm up to date with the latest technologies. Now, you'll always hear me sort of put my hands up and saying, I don't know everything. Who could possibly know everything? The world is changing at a rapid pace. But it's really a case of I've got a lot of connections. And if I don't know the answer to something, I'll be very honest with you. And I'm sure there'll be some questions today where I'll say, I'm not entirely sure about that, but I know where you can find that information, or I know the person who can help you with that. Lots of different roles, as I've said. So clinical, which I'm sure is of interest to you, but I think having these other roles in my back pocket is really good, because it means that I understand the context in which certain things are offered, particularly things like add-ons. I don't like the term, but I think most of you know what I mean by add-ons. But if you've worked for industry and you've worked in academia and you've worked even for the regulator, which I have, you kind of have a more rounded view of why some of these things come into being and become attractive to patients. I've worked all over the world. I've spent most of my IVF career in the UK, but I've worked in the US, and in most of my roles, I've had a kind of global role. And I know that we've got viewers and listeners from all over the world, because I've seen the stats for these webinars, and that's great. I don't see that as a problem at all. And I hope that I keep my talk generalizable enough that it's relevant to all of you. And if I use UK examples, it's just because maybe they're good examples or because I have that experience of that example. And I've been involved in the fertility journeys of thousands of patients. And why I say that is, I'm not a better embryologist than anyone else or treated more patients or whatever. It's just about, people often say, well, my case is different. And yes, it is. And, everybody's got a slightly different case. But the reality is, if you've seen a lot of different cases, nothing really surprises you too much. And you have an answer or like I say, a signpost. And signposts are really important in this field. So I mentioned those top three criteria. Success rate. Well, it's like kind of juggling percentages. So, success rates are always put in terms of percentages, but there's a lot more subtlety to it. And you do have to understand what's above the line, what's below the line. I'll come to that in a second. And you really need to compare apples and apples. That's an absolutely fundamental thing about success rates, because people just tend to say, and I've got a slide in a second to illustrate this, they tend to say our pregnancy rate is X. And then another clinic will say our pregnancy rate is higher than X. And so instantly, it's just a human bias. We all have it. I have it too. We're drawn to the place that sounds better because it has higher success. But if we're not comparing apples and apples, it can be meaningless. In fact, it can be really misleading. We can mislead ourselves, not just the clinics trying to mislead us. And then cost is the other one. They're not in a particular order, although I would say success rates does usually come first. Cost is really important because, most people, for most people, it's not a case of money's no object. They do have to budget, and we'll come to that in a second. So cost is really important. And I think the overarching comment I would make about cost is, ask a lot of questions. I mean, I'm all about asking a lot of questions, but there's a lot of, let's say, lack of transparency in IVF costing. And the regulator and the Competition and Markets Authority, that's a UK reference, but they're quite hot on that. They want to make sure that patients know what they're paying for. And in most other places in your life where you're a consumer, you get reasonably good information, and probably because you understand it better as well. And so you kind of know when you know what you're getting for what you pay. Okay. And then location, not too much to say about this. I've got a bit in a second, but just to say that the good news is there's a lot more availability and access to clinics in many countries. So that is good news. But I suppose if I had an overarching comment about location, it would be to say, of course, it would be wonderful and convenient if you could go to the nearest clinic to you. But the reality is, given my first slide about we're not in a perfect world, you may have to travel further afield. And I know that's disappointing, and I wouldn't want to have to do that. In fact, I'm going to make a personal story in a few slides' time, which I hope will be relevant to you. It's not specifically to do with IVF, but of course, when I want to see a doctor, I don't want to travel half the length of the country. So unfortunately, with IVF, there's an element of that. Okay, so you just have to be prepared for it. And I would just say that's about the mental preparation piece. So let's talk about success rates. I'm only going to show you one slide because there's a whole talk on success rates. In fact, I think I've got a webinar slated for later in the year, and I don't want to get all statistical and everything because that you can lose a few people on that. But just to make some very simple points. Okay, so let's imagine that somebody's looking at two clinics, and they're even in the same town. So we don't even have to play that game of, oh, I've got to travel further afield. They're in the same town. Let's pretend it's London. These are made up ones, by the way. I mean, I hope you realize that from the names. They're made up clinics. They're in the same town, and you live in that town. You're thinking, great, I've got some options. And obviously London has many more options, but here's two. And you see on their website, and it's just a bit of text. It's not really a table, and it says, oh, our pregnancy rate at Best Fertility is 62%, and our pregnancy rate at Better IVF is 45%. Well, like I said, human nature being what it is, you're drawn to the higher one. Why wouldn't you be? I mean, you'd almost feel stupid going to the lower one, be like, there they are telling us it's lower. Why would I go there? But when we scrape beneath the surface a little bit more, one thing that's missing is the patient age. Okay, so we absolutely have to have that to make any sense of these results. And they could be being very transparent, these clinics, and saying, oh, actually, this is all of our patients. And that's nice that they're transparent, but actually it's not helpful because you're not all of the patients, and you don't have an average age of all of those patients. You have your age. And so you want to know what's relevant to you. And then if we look in, again, more detail, and I said I was just going to use a few examples. Now, this clinic, Better IVF, it turns out they report a thing called ongoing clinical pregnancy rate. So that's where a clinical pregnancy is like properly established. and that is per egg collection. So for every egg collection that's done, how many ongoing clinical pregnancies are there? That's how they result in that number, or that percentage, 45. Best fertility, however, and don't forget they're made up, reports biochemical pregnancy, so a much earlier stage of pregnancy, and lots of pregnancies are lost between biochemical and ongoing clinical pregnancy. That's natural. That happens in IVF. It happens in natural conception. No surprises there. It's sort of an expectation, to be fair. And that's per embryo transfer. So they've done a sort of double whammy here, because they're using the thing that usually has the higher number, because you're expecting more loss, and they're using per embryo transfer. So you have to be lucky enough to have had an embryo transferred to even get to that point. So that 62% is artificially way higher than the 45%. And in fact, the better IVF could actually have overall better success rates, but you wouldn't know it from these statistics. So that's enough for now. But like I said, you can dig much, much deeper into success rates. And again, overarching comment about success rates, always understand what you're looking at, apples and apples. And if you don't understand, ask the question. And if the people you ask squirm a little bit, I would say that's quite a good thing, because they should know their success rates and they should understand them. So a little bit about financing and understanding costs. Well, I would always say, I mean, not to be the doom bringer and say, oh, it's never going to work first time. Of course it works first time for lots of people, but it doesn't work first time for more people than it does. And so I think you have to, if you're budgeting, you have to plan for more than one cycle. I think it's really worth, I think any big decision in your life, and this is a big decision and it can be quite an expensive one, I think speaking to a financial planner or advisor, outside, it doesn't have to be in the IVF field, just somebody external, and say, here's something I'm probably going to have to invest in. Let's talk about that. I think you should always consider, I've put NHS for UK, but publicly available treatment if it's available. And I put consider rather than definitely take it. I changed that. Last time it was pursue. But I would say consider it, because it's going to come down to waiting lists, what treatments they offer, which may not be the same as private, or success rates even may not be the same as private. So, but I would definitely say if the option of having free treatment or partially funded treatment is available, definitely consider it. But the waiting list is usually a key thing in many countries, including the NHS. And of course, you need to be eligible. And in some countries, UK being one of them, you need to meet a certain set of criteria that may not be the same in the private sector. And those criteria are therefore somewhat good reasons, but they often feel a bit arbitrary when you're the person who doesn't meet the criteria, obviously. I would always query add-ons and non-routine medications, not because they necessarily don't work or somebody's trying to rip you off. That's not my point. It's more to say this isn't just standard basic IVF. So that list can get very, very long. And so I think you should always put your sort of thinking cap on and say, do I really need this? Why are you suggesting this? How will it benefit me? Are there any side effects, et cetera, et cetera? In the UK, and I would like to think this happens all Europe-wide and potentially further afield, it's really important to get a costed treatment plan, because there's a very big difference between having basic IVF and a fully loaded cycle with everything you can think of. And I don't just mean add-ons, I just mean, doing more monitoring during that cycle. So it's really important to know what the kind of, I wouldn't necessarily say the maximum amount you're going to spend, but a range of what you're likely to spend. And good clinics offer these costed treatment plans. And I think that makes it much easier to budget. And it's a requirement in the UK. I would also consider rather than encourage, multi-cycle packages, because that's not much different from sort of doing buy two get one free that you do at the supermarket. There's an element of that, and I think you should consider what value that might have for you, and the money back plans that there are available. I don't like the word guarantees, but the money back plans where they say, look, we thought you were a good bet. If it's unsuccessful, we'll give you some or all of your money back. And I know some people who've I don't want to say benefited, because that makes it sound like it was a good outcome. And obviously they failed and then got the money back. So that's not a good outcome. But I know that it does actually work. This isn't a kind of fake scheme or anything. And buy medications from pharmacy where possible, because I think clinics have changed a lot from when I first started. But in the past, paying for medications through the clinic was not the most cost-effective way of doing things. So you should, given that you may have to do more than one cycle or maybe more than two cycles, you should be looking to shave costs appropriately, I would say. But then on to the location. I think you have to really consider whether it's going to be local, national, or even international. And then you've got to think about cost, but don't just think about the treatment, okay? Because it's quite easy to look at a clinic overseas and go, oh, that's way cheaper than it is here. But you've got to factor in all the other costs. And I know that sounds obvious. Yeah, Alan, come on, we know that airfare isn't free. We know accommodation isn't free. But there's more to it than that. It's like you might be off work for more time, things like that. So really do a proper spreadsheet, if you like, of all the potential costs that it might have for you. Why do people go overseas? Sometimes there are treatment types that are available overseas that aren't in their country. Local laws and regulations differ, which can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing, because you should probably know that. And these are all the questions you might want to ask if you're like just Zooming, for example, with a clinic overseas. You might want to say, are there any regulations I need to know about that are different? Are there things that would change for me in terms of, donor anonymity is a really good example of that. And language differences. I know a lot of overseas clinics now have people who speak in multiple languages, but don't forget that's the coordinator. That's not necessarily everyone you speak to. And you might want to be speaking to a doctor in your own language. That might be really important for you. And cultural differences. And I've pretty much covered this already. The travel of going either further afield in your own country or international is not just about money. It's, the time and the energy that's required to do this. And obviously, then you've got to think about funding again. So if we, that's all very well. I'm saying all these things you have to think about. So how would I advise people to plan their campaign? Do you know what? Before I even start looking for clinics, I would say, what do I want? What do I really, really want? I'd make my wish list, and I'd make it as long as possible, even though I know it's impossible to, match a clinic to a wish list. But you might as well think of all the things that might later become very important to you, and don't just focus on the top 3 that I mentioned before. And then I've got this wish list, which is like, what do I want? And then I've got red lines. I call them red lines, but you could call them what you don't want. And that's really important too, because if there's something you are really, really not happy about, and this clinic, does that all the time, aside from all its benefits, you might just go, this doesn't work for me. I can't do this. And it'll be very hard to see past that. And it's unlikely they will change all their policies just for you, because certain things they can change, certain things they can't. Trusted resources, we'll come on to that. Information, reviews, and red flags. I've got 3 separate pieces to that. Budget, we've kind of already covered. But like I said, finance advisor is probably not a bad idea. Setting boundaries, I've got a whole article and slides on that, but I'm not going to put it today. I'm going to use just one example. I think a really good boundary when you're trying to choose a clinic is, by all means, get advice from people, but don't get recommendations. And the reason I say this is because I don't give recommendations, and I'm supposedly the expert, right? Of course, I know some good clinics in multiple countries, but now I used to, it made me feel good in the past. I would say to people, oh yeah, I know a really good clinic in such country, or there's one in London. Oh, I know the doctor really well. And it probably is a good clinic, and the doctor is really nice. I can absolutely vouch for that. But things change. Things change over time. Success rates change. Doctors come and go. Staff come and go. Experience changes. The results just go down sometimes for different reasons. And all of my preferences are likely to be different from yours, because I don't know how much money you've got to spend. I don't know whether you're prepared to travel. And the only thing we would probably agree on is success rates, once we both understood we're on the same page and we're comparing apples and apples. Almost every other factor, I would say, is potentially different for me. And that will be true of your friends, family, and other people who are trying to help you, but I don't know that that's that useful. So by all means, talk to them and listen to what they have to say. But I would, resist recommendations. That's my recommendation to you. And then timeline. I've put this because I think people don't give this enough time. Now, I know most people are in a hurry to start, and that's great. And of course, they shouldn't sit around. But when we're talking about spending a couple of weeks, properly doing this before you start actually picking a clinic and starting calling them, because then you start falling into the funnel. We'll come to that later. I think this is time well spent in preparation. Okay, so that's what I mean about timelines: is give yourself the time to make that wish list and do all of those different things before you start going, I've called 5 clinics, and you almost feel like you're stuck with those now. Okay, so starting with your wish list, I've kind of covered a lot of this already for you, but I would say, why not imagine the perfect clinic? I mean, you're probably not going to find it, but why not imagine it? Why not say, if I could wave a magic wand, this would be all the things it has. that are relevant to the medical and well-being side of it. I'm not talking about what type of cappuccino they have, obviously. List your priorities and rank them. So don't just have a list. Say, this is the most important to me. This is the next most. It's quite difficult to do. I'm not saying this is easy, but I would do that, because that's going to help when you actually start coming to clinics and seeing that they match, 9 out of 10 of your requirements. But the 10th one might be the most important one, and you're going to have to let it go. So success rates, cost, and location, there are our top 3. And then they're going to be, this is not an exhaustive list. You're going to have a much, much longer list. And I absolutely urge you to think of that longer list. What treatments and services do they offer? If you really think you need a particular thing, or for example, you want to have acupuncture and they don't offer it, then that could start becoming a no-go for you. Do they have a waiting list? Do you want somewhere without a waiting list? Have you got time to spare or not? Is it a supportive environment? And actually, the best way of measuring this, I think, is that is a word of mouth thing. I think that's quite good. And the chat rooms, I think they're good for that sort of thing. And also, if you have a free consultation or a visit or something like that, you can get a vibe of what the place is like. And if they're a little bit offhand with you just on a visit, you're going to think, well, if that's what you like when I'm visiting and I haven't even paid anything, what's it going to be like when I actually pay and come here as a patient? Are they flexible in terms of timing for scans and tests? That may not be too relevant to you, but to working people, that can be, a real deal breaker. And then what are your red lines? And there are, again, many red lines, but I'm just putting a couple. Some people say, I want to be treated by a female doctor. And whether it's a female or not, I want to be treated by the same doctor throughout. And this is, I wouldn't call it the number one, but this is quite a common thing I hear, is there was an expectation they would have the same doctor throughout, and they met them once or maybe twice. And that wasn't what they're expecting. And, a lot of this is about expectation management. And then laws regarding, I used the example earlier, donor anonymity. Some countries, they have specific laws, and the donor has to be anonymous. And that might not be what the patient wants for their child. So let's get to the where to find information. So this is a difficult one. I mean, I wish it were easier, but I would say ideally a reputable non-commercial source is your first port of call. Friends and family are great, but I wouldn't say it's always trusted factual information. Bulletin boards are great. I think they're great for support and raising awareness and things like that, but I'm not sure they're always the best for giving actual facts, because there's a lot of opinions on there, and some of the opinions are fantastic, but that opinion means it won't always be fact, and there'll be differences of opinion, which means there's different facts, and we're not dealing in different facts. If it's an unknown, that's fine. We don't have a fact yet, but you can't have two things being true at the same time. Google is great and is my first port of call for everything. And, other search engines are available, but of course I'm just using Google. And the 5 searches I'm going to show you today, which is my classic thing, and I've updated it as I suggested that I might at the beginning. I just use the search, which you might think is a terrible search anyway. You might think, oh, Alan, this is so, it's such a noddy search. Why would you do it so unsophisticated? I put best IVF clinic London, and I just want to see what happens whenever I do it. Okay. This was May 2022. And I'm going to need my glasses here, actually. So this is the London Acupuncture Clinic. No, I'm not criticizing London Acupuncture. Doesn't do IVF as far as I'm aware. Next one I do is actually a clinic in London. Fantastic. Good. We found an IVF clinic. Is it the best one? No offense to the lister. I think it's a very good one. But is it the best one? Well, depends, right? Depends how we're measuring it. So that looks like search engine optimization to me. Then this one, London Doctors Clinic. And these all came up on the first page or the first hit on those dates. London Doctors Clinic, that doesn't do IVF either. It might refer you for IVF, might, but it's not an IVF clinic. So a bit of your time has been wasted. Go to February 27, which is just before I gave my last talk, or I think I gave my coaching talk then. The day I did that, number 2 on the search list for best IVF clinic London, it's a bit small, but you can read it in the search term, an antibody comes up. I mean, this is not an IVF clinic, all right? So there's a link to IVF somewhere, but it's not clear. And then today's one, this one blew my mind, and I'm keeping this one for a while because it made me chuckle, but I just thought, I give up. Number 1 on best IVF clinic London today was women's fertility supplement at Holland and Barrett. That I didn't think was a huge problem, although it's not an IVF clinic. And then I clicked on the link, and that's what I saw. Well, I certainly wasn't looking for that when I was looking for the best IVF clinic. And I'm not going to read it out. You can look for yourself. So what do we have to say about Google and search engine optimization? Well, I kind of say, is it working for you or is it working for the company that's advertising on there? And I think you've just got to take it with a pinch of salt, and you've got to use very precise terms. But even precise terms won't always get you what you want. Best IVF Clinic London's pretty precise, and it clearly doesn't really work. So I think you've got to be prepared for quite a lot of digging. So ratings and reviews, just say a little bit about this. The three important things, I'll say there's like a triad of important things. Numbers, I don't really believe reviews or ratings when the numbers are really low. When I say believe, I believe the comments, because we'll come to comments in a second, but I'm not too excited about the numbers. And that's a bit of a scientific method thing. And I guess, that's a function of my scientific training. But when there's what we call an N, a number of, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's not a statistic. It's not telling me anything super meaningful. But because I always read the actual comments, that becomes more relevant. So is it credible? Is it a credible review site as well? And you'll get that a bit from numbers, and you'll get that a bit from how many other people use it. And then is it independent? Well, we've all heard of the scams where people buy reviews and stuff like that. So I think it's a difficult marketplace for everyone, including IVF patients and all the other parts of your life. So customer satisfaction, though, word of mouth, I think is very valuable. Again, not for recommendations, more for endorsement of something you already want. You say, this is what I'm looking for, and they go, yeah, that would be a good place for you. Bulletin boards, I think they are good for that kind of getting an idea of what, if it matches your needs and someone says, yep, I got that in spades at this particular clinic, I think that's useful. Trustpilot, Google reviews, and I'll talk about the HVA separately, could be useful, but there's a lot of different review systems out there, and they have been known to be, perverted. And I think it's important to look at the numbers there. I think that's a really important thing. The HVA one is probably very, very trusted, although I tend to think that people who leave reviews are either super happy or super unhappy, and we kind of want to know the stuff in between, because that's maybe where the most likely scenario is. And then I think I've got a slide or one image from Fertility Mapper, which is an independent site that recently, it's been going about a year, I think. The numbers are still a little bit low, but I think it's got some very good metrics on it. And I think it's well worth a look, at least. But I hope you use the sort of method of saying, what are the numbers like, and what are the actual comments that are of interest to me saying. And it's patient-led, that one. So that's the website for it. So I would say, think of ratings not as arrows toward a clinic, more signposts towards the sort of questions you need to ask. So if you've already kind of landed on a clinic that you think is probably meeting all your needs from your wish list and your red lines, and then you look at ratings and you go, okay, someone was complaining about such and such a thing. That's not that important to me, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. So don't get focused on the stars necessarily, particularly if they're low numbers. Focus on the comments. And beware of bias, your own bias, not just bias from clinics and other suppliers. This is one from Fertility Mapper, this clinic, and I know that this clinic is by and large a good clinic, but it got a bad review. So, one review doesn't make a bad clinic. This is the HFEA review from a clinic that ended up getting not exactly closed down, but something like closed down. And so if you looked at that based on the stars and the green dots, you'd say, oh, that looks pretty good. And lots of clinics in this country have something like that or slightly better. So I don't know how useful that is. And that's not me having a go at the HVA. It's just saying it's a bit of a blunt instrument. But I would say this one's really important. Look for red flags. Now, sometimes the red flag can be quite hard to see. And unfortunately, you have to do the investigating here. So Google definitely comes in handy because it does have a lot of stuff that's been posted, good and bad. And you're sort of looking for the bad that's true, and the asterisk there is for make sure you fact check it. Word of mouth, people will give you red flags if you ask them the right questions. It's all about asking the question, though. So this isn't about saying I absolutely believe what I just read or was told. It's about saying now I know the question to ask. And I said I was going to give a personal story. I'm about to go through some surgery, and I guess I was sort of directed towards a particular surgeon. So of course I Googled him. I wanted to see whether he'd been struck off or had any kind of investigations into him, what the patient said about him. And again, I was going to use my own method. I wasn't going to say, oh, if he's got one patient saying something slightly negative, I won't go there. But I did my homework to look for a red flag, and I hate that you have to do that, but it's worth doing. And here's why. So this is, I told you it was up to date in the news. This is what I clicked on today, although I already knew this story. There was a London clinic, and we don't need to talk about the clinic specifically because, these things happen from time to time. But a London clinic had problems with its embryo freezing and storage. That was reported in 2024. And this is a very specific warning because it mentions a clinic and it says what the problem is. And there was also a similar problem. I don't mean the same actual problem happened, but there was a suspension of their license back in 2022 for staff shortages. So when I said about consistency, that there's a pattern here potentially. And again, I'm not having a go at this particular clinic. I'm just saying look for patterns. And what would your action be here? Well, I'd say contact the clinic if I was sort of unfortunate enough to have had or be having treatment there, and ask questions and see what can be done. And if you are prospectively looking for clinics and this one popped up or one like it, with a similar kind of red flag on it, consider something alternative in the short term, because you can say, oh, lightning doesn't strike twice, but I'm not sure that's entirely true. And second thing in the news, and this is more general, so I put general warning here. There was a article just a day ago about egg freezing patients being misled by clinics, and I'm not going to get into the details of whether they were misled or not. But the point here is, look for the general warning. Clinics are not being transparent about their success rates after women are frozen and want to thaw their eggs, and there may be all sorts of reasons surrounding that. But the point really is, the action you take is to ask the clinic questions about that particular issue. Okay. Because it doesn't suddenly make a clinic bad because they've not put the right thing on their website. It's not a good sign, but it doesn't, invalidate their existence. But it shows you what you should be asking questions about. I always say this: tune your BS detector. Oops, sorry. And I won't read it out. Those are the sort of things you should be thinking about. They're things you use in your everyday life in all interactions with other human beings. Okay, so if you have any chance of speaking to someone within a clinic, tune that BS detector and listen to the answers. So to summarize, we've talked about right versus best. We've talked about trusted resources versus clinic websites alone. Don't forget that clinics are businesses and they have to put themselves in the best light. That's not a criticism, that's business. That happens in every other area of life. But it means you've got to have that filter. Is it going to be in country or overseas? Try and differentiate between pure marketing and opinion and fact. You do need to understand success rates to a degree. You need to at least have a general understanding of reviews and how flawed they can be, and a bit about compliance. That thing I showed you with the HVA, with the stars, you can find inspection reports, and they're quite boring to go through. But if there's a problem, it will be there. You could do a search term and look for incident or something like that. And I always say try before you buy. If there's a chance to visit or have a free consult, do it, because you're going to pick up a lot of stuff, because humans are very good at picking up those nuanced things. And that might be much more valuable than looking at a statistic on a piece of paper for you. And avoid falling into the funnel. So if you do, do that jumping to thinking about some clinics straight away, be careful not to fall into the funnel, because once you start talking to them, having tests and things like that, it may not be them pulling you in. You might feel like you can't escape. And I think that's really important. I speak to a lot of patients who feel like they're in that situation. So cautionary tale really is, most people I meet have already had at least one failed cycle. And they're always, not all of them, but they're usually surprised the clinic didn't match their wish list. And I would say because they didn't have a wish list. They've got a wish list now, but they didn't have it at the beginning. If I meet them, obviously things haven't gone well so far. And we know that more than half of IVF cycles have failed. That's just a statistic. So that can be a lot of people. And people often seek help, whether that's from a coach or anybody else, somebody outside of the clinic that they're, that they feel like they're already in. And they only do it when they're desperate. And I think people should be doing it way, way before that. Okay. Because I know pain drives decisions, but if you can try and keep that idea of, look, things aren't that bad at the moment, but I could do with some help. I think that's a really important thing. And it is one of the most important decisions you're going to make. So I want you to ask yourself, what is the next step you're going to be taking, whether you're already in treatment or you're waiting for a new treatment or you haven't even started treatment yet. I want you to think about what will your next steps be, and I hope you'll take some of the suggestions that I've made today. And wherever you are, whether that's in your first cycle or you've had some cycles already, successful or otherwise, you can always book a free call. And although I'm giving the talk and I have that opportunity, there are lots of other coaches available, and so I don't want you to think I'm the only game in town. Not at all. And it should be no obligation. I don't think you've got anything to lose apart from some time. And I'm really confident. I never use the word guarantee, but I'm as close to guarantee as I can be that you'll learn something at least. So thank you very much for listening and good luck. And I'm really looking forward to your questions.
Brilliant as always. Thank you so much indeed for sharing your expertise here and of course for your tips. And as you said, it doesn't hurt to ask, right? So just find out a bit more and on various topics and of course on this particular topic. So we have some questions, but we are ready for your questions, all of them. So if you have some more, you know what to do. Go ahead, type them in. And I see some people are already starting to type. So let's go ahead. Let's start with the first question, an interesting question for sure. So can you please compare in general clinics in the Czech Republic, Spain, Portugal, Cyprus? A lot of people from my country go to Czech Republic and Cyprus if they are not successful at home. And I think that's something that happens quite often. Anything you can comment on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate the question in the sense that you didn't say recommend me one, because I've had a few calls recently where someone's actually like pointed at me and said,
Yeah.
Alan, recommend
Which
me.
one?
It's not going to happen. Okay, so let's get that clear. Okay, so some general things I can say though, and that is actually a very big topic. I mean, it's a huge topic. But if I sort of generalize, I would say all of these countries have good IVF. So there's not. I wouldn't pick out one and say, oh, I wouldn't go there. It's terrible. Not at all. They all have good IVF. Some of them have more access to particular treatments than others. So,
Yeah.
And I'm not excluding Cyprus and Portugal when I say this. I just know these two countries, Czech and Spain, are very well known for doing a lot of egg donation as a percentage of their cycles. So that tells you something straight away. It tells you they have an abundance of egg donors, and it also tells you that they have a lot of experience with egg donation. And so those two things alone are really valuable. So then we could talk about price. Now, do I know all the price lists? Of course I don't. Okay. But we know that a lot of people go to all of those countries because they're often at least the sticker price. They say on a car, you have the sticker price, and then you go and try and buy the car and they say, oh, do you want the special tires? Do you want the special paint? Do you want the cleaning service? So the sticker price in those countries is usually significantly lower than the countries where people are coming from. Okay. I wouldn't say necessarily the success rates are definitely better in those countries as a general rule. And it's quite hard. It's sometimes hard to find up-to-date apples and apples statistics. Okay, so I would definitely say that. But the two comments about the treatment types are really important. Also, certain things are allowed in those countries which aren't. I'm using the UK as my kind of marker, but I could equally say Germany, Sweden. There's loads of countries where things aren't allowed that would be allowed in Spain and Czech and so on. So there's a lot to unpick there. I hope that's helpful because I know it hasn't necessarily scratched the particular itch you have for those countries, but there's a lot to it. It's not as simple as just, this country has like for like IVF, all the same treatments, and I'll get exactly the same thing for a lower price. It's more complex than that.
That makes sense. I totally agree here. So it's something that you need to always think about as well, right? We only have very interesting question, I have to say. The next one is here. So how can we get information about the laboratory? Can we simply ask the clinic what to look for and how to know which one is better?
Okay, so there's a few questions in there.
Yes, true.
Great. I mean, they're not complaining. They're brilliant questions. So how can we get information about the laboratory? Well, you probably know the laboratory is a little bit of a black box. It's not that open to everybody. They don't give visits usually. Yeah. And there's reasons for that. I mean, if you were a patient at Clinic X and your material, your sperm, eggs, embryos were in that laboratory, you might want to go and look around the laboratory because it's your sperm, eggs, and embryos, but you might not want anyone else doing that. So that's why it always feels a little bit like a secret place. but it really isn't. I think embryologists are some of the most transparent and honest people you'll ever meet. And I'm not saying that because I was one. I just think they really are. They absolutely, most of them want the absolute best for patients, and they get very upset when things don't work. You don't see that because they're very good at kind of staying professional and hiding it, but they really care. So to answer your question, how do we get to find out more about the laboratory? I think what I would say is you need to be a bit more specific. So there's, what do you want to know? Do you want to know whether they have incidents? Do you want to know?
Right.
I mean, success rates are obviously something the clinic talks about, but the lab is like the engine room of the clinic. I'm not saying doctors don't do anything, not at all, but a lot of the manufacturing work, if you like, and most of the action takes place in the lab. Okay, so when you get the high level thing like success rates, it tells you a lot about the laboratory. Of course, it tells you about the doctors and the stimulation and things like that, but it kind of tells you more about the laboratory. And I would say most clinics that have very good success rates have very good laboratories. It's almost like it doesn't matter how good the doctors are. If you have a bad laboratory, you will have bad results. So I'm just interested in what you actually want to know about the laboratory. But to you, I'm always about asking questions. Once you have those specific questions, so let's just make one up and say, what's your thaw rate? Because this is relevant to the freezing egg story. What's your thaw survival rate for eggs for women under 35? Really specific question, right? And then they go to their little chart and they go, oh, it's 95%. And then you go, how many women have used those eggs? And what success rates did they get after they did IVF or ICSI or whatever they had to do? That's a really specific question. Now, I know that doesn't sound like that's asking about the lab. To me, that is 99% talking about the lab and not much else. So that's why I'm saying, because I'm just interested in, or do you use time-lapse incubators? That's another good question for a laboratory. Do you use time-lapse incubators, and do you use them for all patients? So be really specific about your question, because otherwise, I mean, you'll be talking to an embryologist all day and they haven't got all day to talk to you, unfortunately. So and I say this for all things where patients want to ask questions, be as precise as you can, be as concise as you can, write it down so you don't kind of get confused halfway and go, what was I going to ask? And that's a really good rule of thumb. And then when you say what to look for and how to know which one's better, well, because you can't see the black box, you sort of have to measure it based on those statistics. So once you've gone below those high level statistics, clinical pregnancy rate and so on, I would start asking the questions about something that's specific to your treatment. Okay, so if you're having ICSI and using frozen eggs, something that's super specific, I'd be saying, when do you use ICSI? What's the criteria for using ICSI? What's your fertilization rate with ICSI? So yeah, you do have to learn a lot of these things, but otherwise it's a bit of a generalized question, but a great question.
So basically, always be prepared and have like a number of questions that you can ask the not only one clinic. I think it's always good to ask the same questions, like at least 2, 3, maybe even more, to simply get those answers, and then you can compare it. This is the only way to do it, I guess, right? Okay, thank you so much. This is an interesting one. Okay, next question actually from the same patient here. Can we trust clinics that offer guarantee programs? For example, they say that you get back 80% of the money if a pregnancy wasn't achieved, and there are also like 100% guarantees, right? So what can you say about that? Anything you can...
I got 2 things to say about this. Okay, the first one is I personally know some patients who got their money back, and they even got their money back, and it wasn't, I don't say if I was the clinic, because I would have given their money back as well, but if the clinic wanted to be really difficult, they could have said, well, you haven't exactly met the criteria here. So the clinic could have been difficult, but they said, okay, no, fair enough. Here's your money back. Now that doesn't mean on every occasion you don't get any trouble at all. That's just me saying, I believe in principle that it works. And if it didn't work, I think the HFEA and the Competition and Markets Authority, just to use the UK example, would be all over it. Like really, really onto that straight away, because that would be essentially like fraud. Okay, so I do believe it's true, but read the small print. It's always important to read the small print, because there will be things, saying, well, you only get 80% back if this happened and blah, blah, blah. So just be absolutely sure what's happening. But here's the other point, and I think more important point. Why do these systems exist? These systems actually are a little bit of a quality measure of you as a patient. And I hate saying it that way because, you're an individual who's got the dreams and ambitions and everything else. But if you talk about in actuarial terms, where you're trying to work out chances, probabilities of things happening, someone has done calculations based on the success rates of this clinic and all the factors that go into that, and said, this patient in front of me, from all the things I know, has this chance of succeeding within 1 or 2 cycles. So actually, it's in their interest to do this type of scheme properly, because they will make more money if they do it properly. If they pick the right patients, which kind of means you're a good bet. If you get picked for one of these, you're probably a good bet, because if you're not a good bet and you're going to fail 3 times, yes, they're going to lose. They're going to get money, but they're not going to get success. And what they want is to get success on the first cycle and bank the rest of the money. And I know that sounds really cynical, but if it works for you, that's great. That's good news. So that I think they think about these things really carefully. And I don't think it's a sort of scam type of scheme. I think it's a really sound scheme.
That sounds great. Yeah, reassuring, I'm sure, for many people here. So thank you so much for that. Okay, next question here. So we live in Hungary, but our only option is embryo transfer, so we have to go abroad. We only tried clinics in Slovakia and the Czech Republic. Do you think we could think of other further options in Europe? Anything you can?
I'm not sure I understand the only option is embryo transfer. I don't understand that.
Yeah.
But let's just say, we have specific options. We've tried Slovakia and Czech Republic. Can we consider other ones? Of course.
Yeah.
But it is kind of, I wouldn't say it's treatment specific. Most clinics around Europe offer most things. I'll give some notable exceptions if that's helpful, because I'm not quite sure what treatment you're actually looking for. But some examples of things that, I know for absolute sure aren't done. In Germany, it's difficult to get embryo testing, for example. In Sweden, it's difficult to get embryo testing. So there's, it's worth finding out in the countrywide part what is and isn't allowed, or what is and isn't done, kind of accepted, because that might be a red line for you. But in terms of if this, because I don't know what you mean by embryo transfer, that's the problem.
Yeah, sure.
When I first read it, I thought it was going to say egg donation, which is something very specific. So yeah, find out, be sure what you actually need. That's that wish list thing, and the red lines, and then try and match that to the country. But the only thing maybe I'm thinking about is perhaps you've gone for, I don't know my European geography that well, but perhaps you've gone for proximity to Hungary and possibly language. So, those are important things too, because I was working with a patient who was over in Singapore, and she said she was doing her treatment over 2 different countries, and the doctors couldn't speak to each other. So it wasn't that she couldn't speak to the doctors, they couldn't speak to each other. And that became a problem. So all the success rates in the world aren't going to fix that problem. So sorry if I haven't really answered your question, but I wasn't entirely sure what you were asking.
Obviously, Nora, if you would like to add something here, go ahead. There's still time for it. And of course, there might be a final question for here today. But as well, again, if you wish to ask anything else, go ahead, type those in. So the question is, so after a known egg failure in the UK, traveling to Europe from the UK for donor egg IVF is our only real option due to waiting lists, cost, my availability as a teacher. What kind of hidden costs should I be asking about? And do you think traveling distance affects the success of IVF?
Well, let's start with the second bit first. Do you think traveling distance affects the success of IVF? Apart from, and I'm not diminishing its importance, stress, but going through treatment is stressful, whatever. So all I would say is, if you are going to have to travel or do anything out of the ordinary, try and make it as least stressful as possible, obviously, because that's going to have an effect. I don't think the traveling per se, in itself is a problem. So it's the sort of the things that are the result of traveling that usually end up being problems. So like timing. So I know people who've traveled overseas and they've had to have a procedure on a suboptimal day because of the travel. So do you see what I mean? So it's not the travel itself, it's the fact that they were traveling and what that meant in terms of timing. So it's those other things you maybe want to think about. So you've almost got to replicate, in terms of the experience, you've got to make the experience as least stressful and as similar as if you had done it in a clinic in the next town, or close by. I know that's easier said than done, but that's the mindset you have to have. Then, where were we? Yeah, what kind of hidden costs? Well, the hidden costs are very similar to what they would be in the UK, because honestly, there aren't many clinics that you would go to and you go, right, what's the price? And they go, it's this. And you never have to pay anything else. I don't know many clinics where that's the case. So all I would say, though, it's the things that happen later, or the things that happen before. So you might see a sticker price of, okay, egg donation, guaranteed 6 eggs, 6 embryos, it's X thousand euros. But if your partner didn't travel with you, or you had to have sperm sent or something like that, there's additional cost to that. And they're not the treatment itself, they're an extra piece in front. So it's the kind of before and afters that you want to think about more. Of course, if there could be things like, oh, well, we're going to do more scans on you, or we're going to do an endometrial receptivity test or something like that. But those are all questions you can ask in advance, in the sense that you can say, the first question I would ask is, what is covered in the amount of money I'm paying? So that's going to give me a list of things. And I would say, give me a list of things, not tell me, I'll have 6 embryos. That's a bit too vague. What's covered? And then if you've been through your own IVF already, you know what the process is, right? So you'll go, okay, where's the bit where they collect the sperm and they maybe store the sperm in advance, if that's what's happening? Where's that bit? Where's the embryo storage if I have additional embryos? Things like that. And of course, you probably know that, or I don't know this because I don't know all the price list, but I imagine that you probably get, a guarantee of a certain number of eggs or embryos. Then you get maybe the first transfer, but do you get storage? Do you get freezing? It covered. Maybe you get freezing. Do you get storage? Is it for the first year only? So it's kind of a how long's a piece of string type of list in terms of hidden costs. But I would say that I don't think the overseas ones are, worse than the UK, and they come up with more and more different things. I just think it needs to be really transparent what you're paying for. I hope that helps.
Definitely. I'm sure of it. So thanks so much. And actually, let's have a look at the follow-up actually from the previous patient. Yes. So Nora meant that our only option is donor embryo transfer. So as far as I know, it is not possible, right? Many countries due to regulatory reasons, obviously. So she was in Czech Republic, Slovakia. So anonymous donation. So I guess, yeah, this is the point here.
This is, unless I'm mistaken here, are we talking about, so sorry, it's another question really. Is it an embryo that results from a donor egg that, you had something to do with the sperm part of it, is your partner's or whatever, or is it a true donor embryo? It came from 2 other people, because you're right. In some countries, it's much more difficult. True. In other countries, it's easier. Now, off the top of my head, I don't and I'm not being facetious here or sarcastic.
Yes, sorry.
No, this is quite a rare type of treatment if it's donor embryo. So I can't think off the top of my head, okay, it's this country, this country, this country, this country. But I would say if it's donor embryo, it will be fewer countries for sure. If it's if it's an embryo that results from a donor egg, it will be a larger number of countries. So I'm sorry I can't answer it specifically off the top of my head, but if the general answer would be, I'm sure there's more than Slovakia and Czech Republic.
True.
But I wouldn't say it's every European country by any means.
Yeah, of course, we need to look at the regulations for sure before choosing a different, because there are anonymous, non-anonymous still in Europe, So you always need to take a look at this. It's definitely important. So, but there are options for sure. I'm sure we've done many of the webinars, of course, on this particular topic. So, if you want something specific, then
the lady asking that question is talking about true donor embryo, comes from 2 completely different people, a bit like surrogacy sometimes works that way. If it really is that, I mean, I think it's a wonderful thing when people donate those embryos, because the truth is a lot of embryos are surplus to requirements. And it's not always the case that the people who've created them don't want someone else to use them. It's just quite difficult to donate them. It's quite a complex procedure. So when I worked in the US, we started a donor embryo program, but there were so many hurdles to get through. But there's definitely people who would like those embryos. So I think it's a great thing if it's available, if that's the thing you were talking about anyway.
Yeah. Thank you so much, as you can see. And I believe that was our final question. But as always, remember that if there's anything else you wish to ask, we are here for you. And I'm sure Alan will be happy to take any of your questions. So you can always get in touch with him directly. So thanks everyone for joining. It's been a great session and lots of questions, interesting questions, definitely
Mm.
interesting session here. So thanks a lot for that. And as always, if you wish to ask anything else, go ahead, type this in, just send an email to us and we'll be happy to share it with Alan. I'm sure he'll be happy to also get in touch with you. And before we finish, Alan, lovely to have you as always. Anything else? Any final words for today?
No, take all I would say is I know you're overwhelmed and it's stressful, but take control of it as soon as you can. The bit you can control, and finding out information is definitely something you can control.
Great advice for the end, for sure. So thanks everyone. Thank you for joining. And as always, please remember that after this webinar, you will be redirected to our survey. So we have some questions about this webinar and of course some topics that you perhaps would like us to discuss. So if there's something that you wish for us to discuss, please take a look and share your feedback. We are really looking forward to hear what you want to say, and this is always a great opportunity for you to share your thoughts, but also for us to make some changes. We want to improve for sure, so don't hesitate. You will be redirected to this site after we finish. Alan, as always, it's been great. I know we have some more events coming up with you soon. Next one is next week, next month actually. Apologies. But of course, there are plenty of new topics, so don't hesitate, sign up, and we are really here for you and answer any of your questions. Thanks a lot, everyone. Take care. Have a good evening and see you soon.
Bye bye.
Take care. Bye.